All right, so my name is Francesca Costa. I'm a public historian, and I'm also the interpretive ranger coordinator here at the Palisades Interstate Park in New Jersey.
So my name is Rick Lathrop, and I am a professor here at Rutgers University in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Natural Resources. And I serve as a director for the Center for Remote Sensing and Spatial Analysis, where we're seated right now. And our mission is advancing the development and application of geospatial information technologies, so things like satellite imaging, geographic information systems, different kinds of environmental monitoring and modeling as it applies to issues related in the environment, natural resources, and agriculture.
So the Palisades Interstate Park, we are a bi-state agency. So we are both New York and New Jersey came together and decided to jointly purchase property both on the New York side and the New Jersey side. Anywhere you go, as far as Harriman State Park, Bear Mountain, Minnewaska, Sterling Forest, those are all our parks as well.
In terms of when we think about land ownership within the state, and it's public or private, in terms of the two big bins, and then private ownership can be, a mix of different kinds of land uses. So everything from, privately owned farms, or in terms of residential type of development or industrial or commercial. So, that's land that is, again, private and, works through the market in terms of, buying and selling of particular properties. The public land becomes a real mix of, in terms of ownership of, could be public institutions at the municipal level, the county level, the state, and then federal. And then there could be a number of lands that are nonprofit. So a number of land trusts, non-governmental organizations like the Nature Conservancy being one of the larger ones, but New Jersey Conservation Foundation and some other ones. And so within for instance, the state is a large landowner. We have state parks, we've got state forests, we've got state wildlife management areas. So different types of land with different kinds of management objectives.
So the Palisades Interstate Park, specifically the New Jersey side, where the Palisades actually are, that came to be because in the 1890s, there were massive quarry operations working specifically near Fort Lee and Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. And people from the New York side were actually getting disturbed by the blasts. There were constant, basically dynamite blasts. And people from both sides of the river were concerned that they were losing this facade that their ancestors spoke about with such reverence. People like Theodore Roosevelt and others who were interested in the history of the area and also cared about the local conservation efforts thought of it as sacrilege that they were blasting these cliffs.
But almost a third of our land area is in some kind of conservation easement or management. That's another category I haven't talked about is an easement. So a conservation easement is where land might still be owned by a private individual, but has restrictions on development. And so a prime example of that is our preserved farmland. So those are still lands are still owned by individuals, but they've sold the property rights to the state. The idea that it won't be developed or there's restrictions on potential future development moving forward.
There were people, it was pretty public support for preserving the Palisades. But it all came to a head when the women's clubs of New Jersey actually gave that political push on the Jersey side. The women's clubs of New Jersey actually started letter writing campaigns and started convincing powerful men to get involved in this fight. And after their involvement and after some wealthy donors like John D. Rockefeller Sr., J.P. Morgan, and also George Perkins got involved. He was the right-hand man of J.P. Morgan, but he actually was appointed as the representative of both governments, New York and New Jersey, to go ahead and negotiate with those massive quarries. And by the year 1900, both state governments signed laws that allowed us to create commissioners and start becoming a public entity buying up that land.
So when we think about build out, that's, where all available vacant land. And so when we talk about vacant, that's land that hasn't been developed, okay? And that land is potentially available for future development. And so the idea behind build out is like, in terms of if we take New Jersey's land area, a certain proportion, like I mentioned before, are protected through some kind of public ownership, conservation ownership, or through some kind of conservation easement. And then a bunch of other acres that are private land, and that may have already been developed, okay? To, let's say you have a zoning, and the zoning is 2-acre tracts, and you've got a house on every 2 acres, you're not really going to be able to add more homes without changing the zoning. But you've got a 10-acre farm or a 100-acre farm, still that 2-acre zoning. That means there's a number of acres that property could be subdivided and then built on. So that's what we would consider vacant. And then also when it comes to build out, you may have private property that could be developable, but there might be regulations limiting development on some of that property. Maybe there's steep slopes or there's wetlands. And so even though that wetland is in public ownership, there's regulations at the state and in some cases federal level that they may not be developable. So when we think about build out, we kind of remove the lands that are already publicly owned, remove the lands that are already developed to their capacity, remove the lands that are regulated, and then there's another piece that's vacant and potential and developable. And so that's what, when we first started looking at this, was thinking about what is that rate of development and how much remaining land, and if we kept that rate up, when would that vacant developable land, potentially be all developed? And that's when we first started. Again, I mentioned, we were losing or seeing 15,000 plus acres per year in terms of the conversion rate, in terms of open space to development, and that has, since changed dramatically. Though more recently, we've, seen a slight uptick. But in that same intervening period, New Jersey has purchased, significant amounts of additional open space. And so some towns, a number of New Jersey towns have reached build out, and other towns are kind of approaching that, especially in some of the suburban areas or the fringe suburban areas.
Unlike most stories like Acadia National Park, where it was only under control of the Rockefeller family before, or Duke Farms down in South Jersey, this wasn't necessarily one individual donating an estate to us. It was actually a massive network of both people along the river and also people on top of the river. So people who have owned land along the Palisades range from freedmen communities all the way back from the 1800s and their emancipated ancestors, and also people along the river like boatmen, ferrymen, quarrymen, so mainly laborers. And then on top of the cliffs, there was also a large slew of wealthy industrialists that actually owned clifftop estates. So we get this really interesting range of both cultures and also, tax brackets that makes it really interesting to study how this community was living side by side. Who owns the land now? That is the Palisades Interstate Park Commission. Like I've said before, it's a bi-state agency, and I think from the 1930s it's federally recognized as well. So one state can't back out of this arrangement.
Well, one of the things that our recent work looked at was the amount of development that has occurred within our floodplains, our flood hazard areas and riparian zones. And so the reason I bring that up is that we're concerned flooding is a major issue that impacts urban and suburban communities. And we see that approximately 20% of New Jersey's floodplains and riparian zones are urban land uses. And so, that's a pretty high percentage. And so that's why we see such an issue of how flooding can impact, and then thinking about projected future climate change, where we're expecting more precipitation, extreme precipitation events, and flooding means it's going to be even of greater concern. So moving forward, that's an issue that is going to become even more difficult to handle, and it's something that we do need to get a handle on, both for the safety of the population, but also in terms of the environment itself, in terms of protecting our watersheds and our water quality for drinking purposes and habitat and the like. And so again, thinking of the future is how will projected climate change, talk a little bit about flooding, but wildfires. What does this mean for development? And especially wildfires affect our exurban development, but also potentially suburban development. And so normally that's been something that was relegated to the Pine Barrens in southern New Jersey. But this past year, especially about the year prior, been some pretty major forest fires in North Jersey, where in our forested highlands region. And so again, that's potentially a future emerging problem that will affect urban, exurban communities. Greater development within urban areas and the like will help alleviate that, relieve some of the pressure in terms of some of the exurban development. So that's a good thing. But as we densify, we also want have people access to green spaces. And so, rather than strictly open spaces out of the fringes, how can we create green spaces that people can enjoy within our cities? So
every weekend, especially in the summertime, thousands of people who come here for recreation, for picnicking, a little space of green, and a lot of people leave with a new appreciation for the history and also the ecology that's right around them. And so thinking creatively there, how can we restore existing brownfields, potentially into green fields, and again, old brownfields, old prior development areas, landfills and the like. And so there's a lot of interesting elements that people have been thinking about in terms of design, kind of an exciting, in terms of landscape architecture, and thinking about how we can design cities to be resilient to some of these climate extremes, but also have enhancements in other ways for the community residents. So I'm very happy that this place is here for all of us, not just for one individual, or it's here for all of us, and it's public land. So I hope to see everyone on the trails.